Hey everyone, my name is Nina, and welcome to the first ever episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. I am so glad to be here. I'm here with my producer, Edgar. You want to say hi, Edgar?
Yes, I do. Hi.
I want to thank Edgar so much for producing this podcast and making this podcast possible. And also to my audience and to my live audience. I'm not sure how big it'll be tonight for the first episode, but for those of you who are tuning in live, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys coming and listening. So as most of you know who are probably tuning in, I had been doing a podcast with Antonia. She is going to have her own podcast through Gun Owners America, and so I thought that this was a great opportunity for me to also do my own podcast, which I have been thinking about doing for... It's been a long time. It's been about since when I was trying to get Ron Paul elected back in 2012. I've thought about putting something on YouTube and doing a podcast. But you know, life gets in the way, and so now I finally have the opportunity. I have a great producer, and I'm here. So welcome to Down the Rabbit Hole. So just to introduce myself a little bit for those of you who might not have known me before, like I said, my name is Nina. Some of you might know me as Violet, which is a pen name that I use online sometimes. Some things to know about me. I am an attorney. I went to Boston University Law School. I graduated in 2015. While I was in law school, I worked for DC Comics and their legal department, which was a lot of fun. I've lived in 3 countries, of course, including the United States, but I lived in Italy. I also lived in Germany, which I got to learn a lot about history during both of those times. You know, ancient Rome is a big deal, and also when I was in Germany, I got to learn a lot about World War II. So that's really, those experiences have shaped me a lot. Right now, I run my own law practice here in Colorado. I am, obviously, if you guys have watched any of my podcasts with Antonia, I am a pretty big libertarian. I care a lot about the Second Amendment. It's one of my big issues. But I also, for those of you who might follow me on other social media, you might know that one of my big things is property rights. So I'll talk about that a lot in this podcast. I'll also talk a lot about cultural issues, and to the extent that Edgar can bear it, I'll talk about some spirituality and maybe some Christian issues as well. We'll see if he can even handle it. I'll always put that toward the end of the podcast. I'll talk about the cultural issues and the property rights issues first because I'm sure my audience cares more about that. But those are kind of the main things I want to talk about. That's why I started this podcast. That's a little bit of a background about me. Some things that this podcast is not, and as a lawyer, I have to say some of this stuff. First of all, nothing I say in this podcast is legal advice. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but people might ask questions in the live chat, and really, I can't give you legal advice. No one who is the audience of this, I am not your attorney, okay? I don't represent anyone who's listening to this, unless you're one of my clients who's happening to tune in already, but really, none of this is legal advice. I'm not shilling for anyone. There is no one financing this other than Edgar's goodwill in terms of helping me produce this, but I'm not getting any kickbacks. There's no checks coming to me. All of these opinions are my own. These are my ideas. This isn't just going to be like your average libertarian podcast. Most of us in the libertarian community kind of get the gist, right? We know taxation's theft. We know the non-aggression principle. We know all of the things that Ron Paul has been talking about forever. We understand the evils of the Federal Reserve, all that stuff. So it's not just going to be me talking about basic libertarian issues. This also isn't, I'm not really doing this as a means to make money. I know a lot of people start YouTube channels and other things as a way to try to have a career or a lifestyle with that. But really, I just want to express my thoughts. That's why I'm here. This isn't for money. This isn't for anything other than that I think our culture and our country is in trouble. And I'm hoping also that, first of all, that I can bring some reason to the world, and also that I can espouse libertarian ideas in a way that they haven't been framed before, in the hopes of maybe uniting some libertarians, because we have a lot of diversity within the libertarian community. So please consider this podcast just This camera? Okay, thanks. Thanks, Edgar. Please consider this podcast just my barbaric yelp into the universe, to quote Walt Whitman. And also, you might want to know why I called this called this podcast Down the Rabbit Hole. I've always loved Alice in Wonderland. It's been imagery that I've always related to. But I think that in the last couple of years, especially since the election of Donald Trump, our country has really been thrown into a wonderland. We are living in a time where we're not just living in the sublime now. We're far beyond that. We're in the ridiculous. We're living in the time where up is down and left is right and nothing makes sense and everything's racist and sexist and that's why I feel like I've been in the rabbit hole. Thanks, Edgar. I feel like I've been in the rabbit hole for a long time. Especially as a libertarian, and if my audience is filled with libertarians, you guys probably understand how it is to feel politically homeless most of the time. And I've always felt like I'm a little bit crazy talking about some of these ideas because when I first became a libertarian and I tried to spread the news of liberty and all of that, I got a lot of pushback. People didn't want to hear about liberty. It wasn't something that people liked to be approached with. So even back in 2012, when I kind of really dove into the libertarian ideology, I always felt like I was in a bit of a wonderland. But now we've gotten to a place where people are talking about how men can have periods and get pregnant. And we're talking about a situation where we have presidential candidates saying we want to provide health care for anyone who can stumble across our border. We're going to provide full health care. But simultaneously, we're going to be confiscating your weapons, even though we think that the president is Hitler. So we're just in this world where nothing really makes sense anymore. Parody from the 90s is now fact, like things that were jokes in Seinfeld in the 90s now just are true. And I think that most of my audience will understand what I mean by us being down the rabbit hole. So I'm just going to jump into the big topic I wanted to talk about today, which is something that is, it's maybe a little incendiary, but I want to talk about the cultural civil war. And a lot of people don't even like the phrasing civil war because they say that if you even talk about it, that you're kind of accelerating it or maybe bringing it into being just by talking about the fact that we could be in a cultural civil war that might be leading into an actual hot civil war. But I want to talk about it because I think that there's actual grounding in the two factions that are kind of being created in our cultural civil war. And I think it has roots in the Civil Rights Act. So let me just explain what I mean by the two factions. And I think that people who have been paying attention to culture and to what's happening politically can kind of see these two sides of what's going on in our country, or at least in America. We have a group of individuals who I think it's not just people on the right. People like to say that it's a right versus left thing, but it's really not. It's really more so that there's a group of people, myself included, who think that our country and the purpose of our country and the basis of its founding is liberty, right? And we have a constitution that was written in order to restrain the government and the ability that the government had to exercise its power. We gave it very limited, specific powers, and from there, the people were supposed to have all the other power to do whatever they wanted, in essence. And so this is something that we kind of learned, or at least I learned growing up. Our country was founded on this constitution, limited government, liberty, et cetera, et cetera. And I forget exactly whose YouTube channel it was, but I watched a debate, and they were talking about the cultural civil war, and I think it was compelling because they were saying that when the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, and during that era, there was in effect a second constitutional ideology that came into being in America. And obviously there wasn't like there was a new constitution that was enacted or anything. Our constitution is still there. Our Supreme Court still refers to it as the law of the land, all of that. But the difference is, ever since the Civil Rights Act was enacted, there's a group of individuals who talks about the purpose of this country as fighting racism or fighting sexism or that really we're a country that is against racism, we're against bigotry, we're against oppression, right? And it's not that those two things necessarily have to conflict, but there's a lot of people these days, and you can see it, right? You can see it in how the Supreme Court rules on things sometimes. It's a quote that I've said before, which is that I will never understand how the Supreme Court can say that explicitly that you don't have rights that are actually listed in there. You know, they'll keep limiting the Second Amendment, they'll limit freedom of religion, freedom of speech, et cetera, but they're perfectly willing to find rights that aren't written into the Constitution at all. Like, just go right into the stuff that's going to get me in trouble. Like the entire idea behind Roe v. Wade. Abortion is not mentioned in the Constitution whatsoever, but that has now been defined as a right that's now protected. It's a women's rights issue. You know, it's part of our constitutional framework now, even though it's never mentioned in there. And the things that actually are in the Constitution, like our Second Amendment, like the Fourth Amendment, which has been pretty much completely destroyed, these things are viewed with, well, is that what the founders really meant? So the Supreme Court will often say the Constitution doesn't mean what it says, but it does mean what it doesn't say. And I think that that's partially rooted in the Civil Rights Act becoming a new constitutional framework. I think someone, that's you saying that there's feedback on audio. I'm sorry.
No, feedback on audio would be appreciated. So if something goes wrong, it's always nice to know, because I don't always get to hear the actual live product.
So yeah, please let Edgar know if I'm echoing or if there's any kind of weird audio issues or video issues.
Or more specifically, when it sounds amazing and it looks amazing, just let us know.
Or just compliment Edgar. Just get in the live chat and compliment him. I guess, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, Edgar. I've been rambling for a bit. But I do think that there's a new idea, and it's being espoused much more so by the left. But there are some bits of the right, too, that it seems like the Constitution or the constitutional framework or what this country is about has now become about race. Or it's become about what that particular group views as equality, right? Because the left will say that equality is all about almost equity, you know, equality of outcome, and then the right always talks about equality of opportunity. But I don't hear people really talking about liberty that much or limited government that much, other than there's certain people who, classical liberals who I would put on the left, it's kind of small government conservatives and libertarians, and we're all over here talking about the Constitution and wondering why, when we talk about constitutional principles, we don't get further in our arguments. But I think it's because a lot of people don't even espouse to the idea that the Constitution is the framework that our country should be based on anymore. They think that our country should be framed on either anti-racism, anti-bigotry, anti-sexism, or the extremists on the right, it's more so we need to be protecting Enlightenment values, and in order to do that, we can only do that by, elevating whites or promoting white people or having some kind of voluntary separation of ethno-states so that people can actually pursue, what their race was meant to do. So, and maybe I'm being too extreme on that, but those are the far extremes I see on both sides. And I just think that this is really feeding into the Civil War, because right now we are having a battle sort of for the heart and soul of America. It's like, is America about being anti-bigot, or is America about liberty? And go ahead.
Well, and I think I've mentioned this before, and if I haven't, well, here it is again. Everybody's just afraid of real freedom.
Right.
Everybody's interested in their freedom and what they want and what they can have. Very selfish freedom, not real freedom, which is chaotic, evil. Are you going to cuss in your podcast?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's going to get demonetized anyway.
Okay.
So swear away, man.
All right. Freedom is fucked up. It is a savage. It is not pretty. So everybody thinks they like freedom until you have freedom, and it is a lot of racism, and it is a lot of hatred, and it is a lot of, I mean, a lot of amazing stuff as well. But you got to take all that shit with it. There's going to be a lot of people that, and even on my side, even on the libertarian, or I'm more of an anarchist, even on that side, people don't agree with me on immigration or whatever. And at the end of the day, like, it's okay. Like, it's not my responsibility to stop their thought process. And that's how I grow as a human being. But people don't like that shit. People don't. I've been struggling with this with my kids because they're part of the PC culture. I'm 34, so I'm kind of in that weird limbo. Am I a millennial? Am I not a millennial?
Right.
I'd say I'm not, because I don't want to be lumped in with
With
you suckers.
my lot,
with
huh?
you suckers.
Right.
But nobody really wants real freedom, which is ugly.
Well, people say they want it. Like even some of these authoritarian types on both sides will say that they kind of want freedom or that they like it until you start getting into the nitty-gritty details about it. And then all of them want to use the government to enforce whatever things, or to get rid of or to control whatever things they don't like in society. And I do think that we've gotten to a place where so many people are going into sort of this new constitutional framework because freedom is scary, or they think that because capitalism and freedom go hand in hand, right? So they'll say, well, capitalism has failed, even though we really haven't had capitalism since the New Deal at minimum. But they try to associate freedom almost with failure, as if the American experiment in and of itself has failed. And they actually talk about our founders negatively now. When I was growing up, when we learned about the Revolutionary War, it was just a completely different experience. We were learning about these great founders who had these wonderful ideas of liberty and freedom and justice and et cetera, et cetera. But now it's just more that, well, all of that has to be thrown out, or at least for the people on one side of the cultural civil war, all of that has to be thrown out because they owned slaves, right? So it's back to, they were racists, so we can't trust anything that they said. And I think that's why you see so this is something I rant about on my Twitter all the time, but there's people like Alyssa Milano, various other celebrities, even one of my favorites, I shouldn't touch my mic, oh snap. Even one of my favorite female actresses and comedians, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, came out and said that she was in favor of the Equal Rights Amendment. And the Equal Rights Amendment, in effect, this isn't the Equality Act that's trying to be pushed, that is in effect trying to add sexual orientation and sexual, wow, see, I'm gonna get in trouble. What is it, presentation? If you're trans.
I'm
gonna get so demonetized.
Well, see, and that's the other thing, is just like, what the fuck do we say?
Yeah, what do I even say?
What do you even say? Like, and it's cool. It doesn't mean we don't respect you. I mean, Mile High Gun Girl, great friend. We had her on our podcast, Isaac and I. Used to be a guy, now is a woman. Biologically a dude, and we had that uncomfortable conversation. But it's just like, yeah, what the fuck are you like? And it's not it's ignorance. Ignorance in the true sense of it is just, I don't know what it is, and we're at this point where we're redefining every single thing.
Right.
And we're wrong either way.
I know. Like, no matter what I said in that moment, I'm sure I would have gotten slammed. I think probably the term that they would have liked is gender identity. That came to me later. So I'm not talking about the Equality Act or whatever that is. But there's a bunch of women who are going around promoting this Equal Rights Amendment, and the whole point of it would be to say that women are equal to men under the Constitution, in effect. I'm not sure what the precise language is. But what bothers me about it is that I don't think anyone who's a proponent of this has read the Constitution and understood it. Because the 14th Amendment grants all persons in the United States equality under the law. So unless these people don't think women are people or persons, then there's really, I don't even understand what they're trying to go for. They'll say things like, the Constitution doesn't say the word woman once, but the Constitution doesn't say the word man once either. But this is what I'm talking about. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter to this group of people in the Cultural Civil War what the Constitution actually says. All they see is they didn't put in something about women in here. We have to change that because this country is about not being sexist. It's about not being a bigot, right? And you know, in and of itself, I don't really think that there's a problem with wanting to be anti-racist and anti-sexist and anti-bigot. Like I'm anti all of those things. Like I'm half black. I guess that's something I could have done in my who I am, but I'm French Creole. If you look at my parents' DNA makeup, I probably am about 40% African, and then I've got a lot of European up in there. I am more Native American than Elizabeth Warren. But I personally have a stake in our country not being a racist place. My parents lived through segregation and had to drink out of different water fountains and go to different swimming pools or different movie theaters. They had to go to colored-only movie theaters, all that. And I have ancestors that lived in slavery in America that were brought here from, you know, various Western African countries. I don't want this to be a racist country. I also am a woman. I don't want this to be a sexist country. But I also believe that the reason why our country exists and why the Pilgrims got on the damn Mayflower and like risked their lives to go across an ocean, and why, you know, all of our founders risked their lives essentially committing treason against the crown, was to create a country founded on liberty. And it's not, if liberty is secondary to being anti-racist, then we're going to end up in an authoritarian, you know, nightmarish dystopia way quicker than any of us would like. And I also want to talk about this issue not to just be like, oh, look at how crazy these people are who have now adopted this new constitutional framework, but to talk about what the implication of this actually is for our country. Like, what do we do about this? We have two separate sects, two very passionate sects of people who think that the Constitution or what this country is about is totally different. And the thing about a war is that you don't usually just convince the other side. It's one of those things where the war keeps going until someone retreats, until someone concedes, you know? And I gotta tell you, like, for example, during the Kavanaugh hearings, right? Which I've got my own reservations about Kavanaugh because of his rulings on privacy and the Fourth Amendment and some other stuff like that. But I mean, what kind of a hysterical mess was that? Because one woman made a claim that, you know, decades ago, he did something that was vaguely inappropriate, probably, maybe, if it actually happened at a party. And she can't prove it, there's no evidence. And there were chicks outside of the Supreme Court door banging, clawing on the Supreme Court door. It's like we have a side, like this, the side that believes that America is about being anti-racist and anti-sexist, it is almost a religious devotion for these people. I mean, not almost, it's a religious kind of devotion to their ideology. And I don't know, I don't think we're gonna be able to just talk them out of it. I don't think we're gonna be able to just, I mean, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the live chat can tell me what they think about this. But I don't know how we're going to convince people out of something that's religious for them. And this is something I've asked on my Twitter account before as a poll, or not as a poll, just as a general question. I said, if you're an atheist, is there anything that could convince you to believe in God? And if you're a theist, is there anything that could convince you to not? And pretty much on both sides, the answer is no. So, and I don't know about my audience, but for me, I'm very passionate about liberty. I think that if America becomes an authoritarian state all around, you know, for there to be a free country, even close to how free America used to be, that's going to take a lot of work, and it might not ever happen again if we lose America. So I'm pretty passionate about it. You know, I say this now, hopefully I'm actually being honest about that, but if it came down to it, like I would be part of the militia. Like if they're coming to confiscate weapons, if they're coming to really destroy free speech in a real way where my speech is going to be censored or I'm going to face criminal penalties for the things that I say, especially if the things I say are truthful, I mean, I'm going to be fighting in that war because I'm not willing to give up America. But I think that the other side is that passionate too. So what are the options here? I mean, what actually could happen? I mean, maybe just enough time will go by where this all kind of cools off. I doubt that's going to be the case. I think it's very possible that we could have some secessions happening in this country if things get too heated. Not just by people who are trying to protect the Constitution, like people always talk about Texas seceding maybe because, oh, the federal government's getting too crazy. But we also might see a state like California leave because they do want to go this super authoritarian route where the main goal is to be anti-sexist and anti-racist. And look at where California is, you know, kind of following that framework. And the other option is like, and those other options as well might lead to this, but the other final, most dramatic thing is that we could actually have a hot civil war where there's people in the streets battling over this stuff. Because the truth is, if a house divided against itself cannot stand. And we do, I think, have two constitutional frameworks in this country, and that just can't coexist for that long. And that's why every presidential election is the most presidential election ever, or most important presidential election ever, because we really have this situation where, depending on who's the president and who controls the House, I mean, it could completely change how the cultural civil war ends up going. For example, the last election was really important just because of the Supreme Court nominations. You know, Trump got 2 in his first term. If he gets his next term, I mean, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was hospitalized again recently. I don't know how long she's going to make it. I mean, I hope she does well. I don't wish any ill will on Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She actually did some really interesting work, legally speaking. You know, I kind of admire her work when she was just a lawyer practicing and doing appellate cases to actually make the Equal Rights Amendment, like the actual one, the 14th Amendment, have some bite to it for women's sake. She did a lot of good things for women. But if Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies and Trump is still in office, I mean, talk about a powder keg. This whole thing could just blow up. And it's because one more Supreme Court justice, because the Supreme Court is so powerful, and the entire trajectory of our country could go completely more conservative. I mean, we could be ushering in decades of conservative, SCOTUS rulings. Or alternatively, if we get one of these Dem candidates, I don't know if any of them are going to be able to beat Trump personally.
No, if you get, just to jump in very briefly, if you get a lot of conservative rulings, is that necessarily a good thing?
Not necessarily, no, because that's the thing. I feel like freedom, in addition to the two constitutional frameworks I talked about, I do think freedom was kind of split in half a long time ago. And so the conservative justices, they're really good on certain aspects of constitutional, liberties, so to speak, but they'll be terrible on things like privacy or on things like war. They'll just give the president all kinds of authority on stuff like that. And that's why I've taken a test or a quiz, like which Supreme Court justice are you the closest in alignment with? And it's always just like across the board, I'm not in alignment with any of them. Because as a libertarian, if you don't divide up liberty, you end up disagreeing with the Supreme Court justices probably about half the time, no matter which one they are. So yeah, but I don't know. I wonder how this is all going to turn out. I don't think it's going to be pretty. Like I don't really see an elegant solution for the cultural rift that we have, because like I said, it's almost religious on both sides, and not only that, it's really for the heart and soul of what America is. What do you think is going to happen, Edgar? I foresee some secessions first. I think that's probably going to happen before anything else, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. In the short term, I think Hillary's going to come in.
Really?
And I think she's going to win.
What? Are you playing?
No.
Why do you think she's going to come in?
Because she's already been talking. She's already been kind of hinting at it. She's already, I think she mentioned once that a lot of people are reaching out and telling her. So she's going to come in and steal that. And I think she'll steal the election. Isaac had a compelling argument for this on our podcast. And it kind of makes sense. It makes sense. I don't think Hillary would lose a second time around.
You don't think she'd lose?
No.
I feel like she would lose again.
No.
Why? I mean, this is a little bit different from the topic I was talking about, but I'm just surprised. Like, I feel like most Democrats don't want her to run again. And
Absolutely not. But she stole it last time. She'll steal this shit again. Because Bernie should have won. It should have. I mean, by all accounts, Bernie should have won the nomination.
Oh, so you mean win the primary?
I think she'll win the presidency. If she gets in and steals it like she did last time, I think this time she can pull it off.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm 50-50 on that because I think that the left has played its hand a little bit too far with a lot of people. Like I know a lot of Democrats who are disenfranchised and wouldn't vote for any of the candidates that are up there right now. Just because of all the, like, specifically stuff like reparations or the completely open borders, you know, there's a lot of people, even the gun confiscation has a lot of Democrats, you know, just.
Well, Trump lost a lot of support on the gun issue. There's a lot of single issue voters such as myself. Now, full disclosure, I'm an anarchist. So,
yeah. And I didn't vote for Trump either, and I won't.
Yeah.
So.
Just
for the record.
so I'm an anarchist, so there's that. But he did lose a lot of people that are single issue voters on the gun side. Now, so there's that, and then
that's why I didn't vote for him in last go around.
Yeah.
He wanted like he talked about, you know, take the guns first, due process later.
Correct.
I mean, I guess I don't know if that was after he got elected.
Yeah.
But he talked about like having a no-fly list where if you're on the no-fly list, we're also taking your guns. Like there is a lot of stuff that he said before he got elected.
And then there's a lot of PC babies who have become of age.
Yeah.
So they became of age and now they're voting and.
Well, part of the reason why I am not sure about it is because of his approval rating with blacks and with Hispanics. Especially with blacks, it's at like 30% or something now among like all blacks, which is historically crazy.
Yeah, did you see a comment from NG?
Huh?
Oh, there's a comment from on the live chat.
Oh, Trump's current approval rating just increased to 60%. Yeah, so like that plus all this impeachment stuff, his approval rating has gone up since the impeachment hearings happened. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. If the economy crashes, he's screwed. And that could very well happen, too. But anyway, I just want to point out, though, that before I do have another topic I want to talk about. How long have I been streaming, by the way?
You've been at it for half an hour, 35 minutes.
Oh, okay, that's not so bad. So I just want to talk about what is at stake in terms of the cultural civil war. Because if the people who think that America is about being anti-racist, anti-bigot, anti-sexist, whatever, if they win this, like if the heart and soul of America becomes a country that we're not about liberty, but we're about not being bigots, I mean, especially with the kind of technology that is being, you know, created in Silicon Valley and at MIT and stuff, I mean, I really think we would be looking at, we're already kind of in 1984, but really in a place where if you said something that could even be interpreted as racist, you could be facing criminal charges. I think that gun confiscation would definitely happen. I think that stuff like we've seen in Canada, where like Bill C-16, you know, what made Jordan Peterson so famous, like compelled pronouns, that would be 100% on the table. But even more so than that, the issue is that the results of capitalism and liberty might disproportionately affect women or minorities or something like that. And instead of trying to really level the playing field, because there actually are there's still some structural problems with our country, racially speaking, especially with our criminal justice system. But instead of fixing that, and instead of trying to encourage minority communities to be more self-reliant instead of relying on government programs. It seems like it's being framed as, in order to help minorities, the government has to give them handouts. And personally, I've always thought that's really racist in and of itself. It's like, why do minorities need the government's help, but like white people don't? Or like, why do women need the government's help, but men don't? Why they're less competent? I mean, it just seems, it's the same thing too with saying, people who are coming in illegally should be able to vote. It's like, you don't think that a Hispanic person is capable of getting citizenship so that they can vote? Like, why don't you think that they're capable of doing that? I don't know. I've just always had problems with that. But I guess my biggest point is, if we just go down this route, I really think we're going to end up in a place where you're not allowed to be critical of minorities or women in any way, shape, or form, even if it's factual. Capitalism won't be allowed because it might disproportionately affect people. So we'll probably be looking at some kind of socialist Marxist regime. There will be forced speech, kiss freedom of religion goodbye, because this ideology is a religion and they want it to be enforced. They don't like Christianity. So I just think that there's a lot at stake here. And I also, with that being said, I don't think that those of us who do actually think this country's about liberty are going to go down easy on this. We have all the guns too, A lot of these leftists really, they're not buying guns. So I always try to be hopeful. I do think that ultimately liberty will win out in this country. Especially because there is such a thriving group of people in the cultural civil war that are pro-free speech and who are pro-Second Amendment and who do care about liberty and all of that and capitalism. But it's, I don't know, this stuff's scary. Do you think that a state will have the cojones to secede? Or what do you think? And then I'll switch to my next topic,
aside from having the testicular fortitude to do it, do they have the financial ability to do it? Because that's what a lot of people don't think. Not just that. 'Cause when Colorado, northern Colorado, was trying to secede and they were going through that whole thing.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah, everybody. I mean, everybody knew it was kind of silly, but they all forgot this one big question: is where the fuck are they going to get their water from? So I think a lot of these things, a lot of these people don't think about the simplest of things, and then people are like, oh well, it's going to rain. Yeah, a lot of that water is coming from this side of Colorado.
Yeah.
So it's just really small stuff like that when you're talking about secessions, you got to think about that shit. If Colorado controls, we control Arizona's water. At any moment, we could be like, oh, we're gonna cut you fucking off, and then they're kind of screwed for a while. So it's not as easy as just saying that. So. Do they have the balls? No, not in this current state. Everybody's very complacent. Can they get there? Yeah, but I mean, I don't think they will think about it because you look at what happened with Texas. As big and bad as Texas thinks it is, it only took.
They think they're big and bad.
Yeah, they think they're big and bad. It only took a few years for them to come crawling back to the big tit and start sucking off of that one. So it sounds cool until you have no money, and then
right. And you'd have to have a self-sustaining economy enough where you wouldn't need to be trading with the rest of America. Like you would have to have some good farming going on. You'd have to have, I mean, quite frankly, you'd probably have to have some militias ready because the federal government's not going to like that. So, yeah, it would be a mess. Personally, I think that I'm not sure when it's going to happen, but I do think that eventually there will probably be some fracturing. It won't be like every state is its own country, but I think that there might be like regions that become their own countries. Or big states like Texas might be its own thing, but then maybe Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Nevada, Utah, whatever, that might be a state. California's a state. Oregon and Washington State. New York itself would probably be its own thing because they're freaking crazy. Although New York or just Manhattan, just that island might become its own thing, and then upstate New York separates, something like that. But I just don't think that the way that the way that people are divided ideologically, I just don't think it can last forever. And I hope that it doesn't turn into a bloody civil war. I feel like it's something that's almost being fought online. It's kind of weird, but I don't know. We'll see what happens. I don't know. The live chat hasn't really chimed in on their thoughts about it. It's kind of heavy stuff. But, Brett says, get me out of California first, thanks. Yeah, what are you doing there, Brett? Get the hell out of there, man. You could be one of the many thousands and thousands of refugees leaving that state. And it's like, oh, well, maybe, does that have anything to do with policy? Can't be, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, and then let's see. NG says, when relevant, don't want to interrupt, on gun control, thoughts on Virginia's recent dabbling into gun control, making possession of scary guns illegal with no grandfather clause? I'm not sure if I saw that. Are you familiar with that, Edgar?
Yeah, a little bit. And not only that, the worst part about Virginia is they're actually, and I don't know if they've passed that. I haven't kept up with it too much, but they're also talking about, and I don't think it's passed yet, but they are talking about how if you train in a group, or then you'd be labeled as an extremist, you're going to be labeled as a militia group, and that's going to be prohibited as well. So even just the slightest of training, if you teach him, and really the way it's worded at this very moment, the way it's worded there is, even if you have a knife class, it could be considered that. I mean, to a certain degree, if you really wanted to reach and stretch for it, a simple Krav Maga class or karate class could be considered as you teaching somebody how to use deadly force. So it's getting scary with that training aspect of it as well. So not alone, disregard the whole gun stuff, like just your training now for self-defense and obviously for military shit too, but they're trying to ban that as well.
Right, and I do, now that you mention it, I did see an article about in effect they're trying to ban also, like, if you're just doing a demonstration, like if you're marching with rifles, then that would be like illegal because you might be encouraging, violence or something of that nature. Right. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of problems with that. I can't imagine. Oh, sorry, people. Alarm going off. I can't imagine. I'm sure that'll get challenged. I can't imagine that the Supreme Court would uphold that, because it seems to violate a plethora of various, Bill of Rights liberties, like freedom of assembly, freedom of association, and all of that. Not to mention, the Second Amendment. But I mean, really, if you can't be training, if you can't march with firearms in the streets, I mean, that's pretty scary, man. Get out of Virginia as well, apparently. Yeah, I can't imagine it passing constitutional muster.
Here's the problem with that, though. Like, I always appreciate the, get out of there. But the problem is, where do you go? At some point, we're going to be cornered, and we're all going to be in one state. We're already getting sick and tired of everybody moving here.
I know, like, don't come here.
Just don't come here. You can move, but it just, at some point, we have to stay where we're from and fight it there. Because if not, I mean, you look at what's going on with Texas, and this is not just about gun stuff. This is just whatever policy is important to you. If you don't stick it out and fight it there, then at some point you're going to have nowhere to go. And then we're going to be in the same position, because a lot of the people that are somewhat like-minded to us will tell communists, well, get out, go to China. At some point, we'll be that person. Yeah. That's going to be like, oh, I hate the U.S. because no more guns, no more freedom, no more First Amendment, no more anything, because we didn't have the balls to fight in our own state. And then where do we go? And then we're going to be told, well, if you don't like it, then just hit the road. Just leave. No,
it's true. I mean, and that's the thing. It's actually part of the reason why I am in Colorado, because for a while I wanted to be an entertainment lawyer, and to do that, I would have to be in California or New York or whatever. I mean, I can still do a little bit of it here, but the truth is that I love this state, and I don't want Colorado to become California. I don't want it to be, like a socialist hellhole or whatever. I want Colorado to, I actually kind of like that it's purple. It stopped our government from doing that much for a long time. And, you know, it just felt like a very libertarian state for a long time, but that's kind of changing. I do feel it changing a little bit, and it's really sad. And I do think there's something to fighting to, you know, protect your state, especially if you love your state. Like, if you're a Virginian and you really love Virginia, then stay and fight for it, you know. I definitely stand by that. But if you're only in Virginia because, I don't know, of like work or something, I don't know, find a state that you love and then go protect it and make it free. Not that I'm doing great at that, but I'm trying. Baby steps. So the other topic I want to talk about, I'll try not to spend that long on it. Oh, my iPad died, so if people ask me questions, will you let me know?
No.
No. No. So yeah, make Edgar tell me what you guys are saying. But I just want to do a little quick, and this might not be as fascinating as what I was just talking about, but I just want to do a quick basics of property rights, because it's going to be something I talk about a lot on this podcast, and I just want my audience to have kind of a basic framework of it. I think it's really fascinating. I loved my property law class in law school, and I think a lot of libertarians, and I call myself a libertarian propertarian, partially because of this, but a lot of libertarians will understand why I believe that all rights are actually property rights. Not just your real property and your personal property, but your freedom of speech, your right to assemble, even gay marriage, you know, all of that stuff, that's all, in my opinion, a property rights issue. And I'll get into more nitty-gritty, like even certain things like abortion and immigration. I have property rights analyses for all of that. But I just want to give you guys a little framework, especially because, and I don't think I told Edgar this, but I was called like a bad Catholic online the other day because I pretty much said that the government shouldn't be involved in the bedroom because you can do whatever you want in your house. And someone said, well, but you don't own your body, like Christ owns your body. And it's like, well, as a Catholic, I might think that's true, but I still think you have free will with your body, you know? Anyway, I want to go into this because I feel like there's misconceptions about property rights. And they're important, especially in the current era when we have so many socialists and frickin' communists around, because they don't understand property rights at all. They kind of hate property rights and would get rid of them if they could. So property rights really originated with real property. That's really where we kind of got that, you know, created, or that understanding. It's developed through common law, starting mostly with British common law, and then obviously coming to the United States and further developing this idea. But as most of you know, I mean, quite frankly, I should preface all of this by saying, until we get rid of the property tax in this country, our property rights are a little tenuous at best in America. Because if you have to pay property tax on your land, do you really own it? Anyway, you'll be able to answer that question even better after I talk about this a little bit. So when you're in law school, you go to property law. One of the first things you learn about is that when you own a piece of property, it comes associated with certain rights. And they'll refer to that as a bundle of sticks. Like, that's kind of just property law jargon. And some of the things in this bundle of sticks, I have 6 that I like to focus on, but I'll just go through them briefly. But it's the right to possess, the right to control, the right to enjoy, the right to exclude, the right to convey, and the right to destroy. There's a couple other ones as well, but those are the big 6. And in terms of real property, it's really easy. And that's why I started with real property instead of getting into all of this stuff like you own your body and you own your mind and all of that. Because with real property, it's really easy to understand, right? For example, the right to possess your property. I mean, in effect, that means that you own it. You've got the deed, it's yours, right? You're the one who's on the land. You're the one who gets to walk on it, be on it. You're not a trespasser on your land. You're the one who possesses it, right? It's the same thing with the right to control. In effect, that's saying you get to decide what happens on your land. If you want it to be for gardening, or if you want it to be for just your house or whatever, you want to put a pool on there, it's up for you to decide. And again, I talk about how property rights are tenuous in this country because these days you'd have to get like a permit to build a pool on your own land, or to even catch rainwater on your own land is like illegal. But so that's the right to control. The right to exclude is the idea that You can kick off trespassers from your property. You get to decide who comes on your property, when, and how long they're there, and you can revoke that as well. You can kick them out later if you want to kick them out. That's the right to exclude. The right to enjoy, it's kind of similar to the right to control, but it's more so that people can't tell you what you can do in terms of having fun on your own property. If you want to play music, if you want to watch TV, if you want to do whatever, it's your property to enjoy. That's the basics of it. The right to convey is really just the right to sell. So that means that if you have a deed for a piece of real property, you can go sell it to somebody. You can say, that's freedom of contract, right? You can say, this is my property. I want to sell it for X hundred thousands of dollars. You make the exchange. You have the right to sell it. Now that other person gets the bundle of sticks that was associated with owning that piece of real property. And the sixth one I mentioned is the right to destroy. And with real property, this one's actually a little weird because destroying the earth, that sounds a little bit strange. But I mean, in effect, that means that you could, if you had like a controlled fire on your own property, in theory, that would be sort of okay. I don't recommend that because if it spreads to other land, then you're immediately liable for anything that happens not on your property. But, these are just some basics. And I think that I'll just go quickly through personal property as well with those. It's the same thing like, let's talk about my iPad as the example. So I have the right to possess it. I have the right to have it in my hand, keep it in my house, have it in my purse, take it with me wherever I want. I have the right to control it. I put a password on this. I chose which apps are on here, all of that. I have the right to exclude from it, again, with the password. I get to decide who uses my iPad, when it's used, why it's used, whatever. It's my personal property. I have the right to enjoy it, right? I can watch TV on this. I can read books on this. I can use it forever I want. If my enjoyment of it is even just to, frame it and put it up on the wall, that's what I can do with it. I could sell this to someone. I have the right to convey it, right? I could sell this to Edgar if he wanted my old, couple generations ago iPad. And also I have the right to destroy this. If I wanted to throw it up against the wall, bash it with a baseball bat, it's my personal property to destroy. So, and part of the reason too why I wanted to talk about this is I think that this foundation with the bundle of sticks, when applied to the body and mind, like I said earlier, are actually the foundation of all of our rights. And I'll get into more detail about that later because it's a little bit more complicated. But I've been trying to write a book about this that I was going to call the Property Manifesto, and I'm still working on it. But for the time being, I think that YouTube and podcasting is actually the most efficient way to get this out. Because even if I publish a book, how many people are going to read it, right? But I can come on here and I can try to explain some of these ideas to you. So please just keep that in mind. When you own property, you get to, there's a lot of rights that come with it. Like having property ownership doesn't just mean that you get to, inhabit a certain piece of property. So I don't know. I wanted to start with that. Eventually I will write the Property Manifesto, but at least for right now, I can give you some basics on that. Did anyone have questions about what I talked about so far?
No, people just added permits, deeds of trust with lenders, underground oil, water,
right,
easements, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, and that is an important aspect of real property as well. Is I forget exactly what the theory is called in property law, but the idea is that when you own a piece of land, you own it in a cylinder, or I guess, I don't know, what would it be if it's a square or whatever. The point is, you own it up to the heavens and down to the center of the earth. So that's where you get mineral rights and all of that. That's kind of in the right to control, the right to enjoy, right? You get to, if you have oil or gold or whatever on your land, you get to mine that out and use it.
Is it labor,
right? And you own all
labor
of that.
theory of property?
What's that?
Labor theory of property? No.
Oh, there's a couple theories about how property comes into being.
Okay, got it.
And that's probably what they're talking about. There's some theories where they say that basically property only exists because someone put their sweat or their labor and sweat into appropriating something for use. And that's actually most of the argument about why and this is kind of some testy area, but why, in effect, it's like okay, sort of, that we are here in America and like sort of took some of this land from Native Americans, because the idea is that we were the ones who actually put some of this land to use first. And it's actually interesting, rights to water use kind of have this theory as well, because in places like Colorado where water is not abundant, it's not about like who got to, it's not about necessarily even if it's on your land, but it's about who appropriated the water for their use first. So so that's one theory. It's about whether, like, if you did some kind of laborious task to achieve property. But you could also just buy property, you know, you could buy it from someone else. And some people want to argue that property rights only exist because of scarcity. And you know, like, we have to protect property because there's scarcity and things can't be communally owned because of the tragedy of the commons and yada, yada, yada. But I actually don't like that argument for the creation of property rights, because I still think that even if we had infinite everything, like even if we had infinite bananas, let's say, I still think that I should be able to say, but these particular bananas are my bananas. I don't care if there's a billion bananas, like these 5 are mine, right? So, and like, let's say we get space travel going, where all of a sudden there's an abundance of like infinite land to be owned in the universe. Even then, I still don't think that that would void your property rights and the real property that you possess right now. So, but you can imagine how, if you apply these theories to your body and your mind, how you might get some of these other rights. And I'll just tease at it a little bit. Like, if you own your body, doesn't that mean you have the right to possess it and control it and exclude from it and enjoy it? And I mean, it's a little bit different. Like, you can't really sell your body. You can't really convey it because you're permanently attached to it. But even still, like, this is why I'm sort of okay with like prostitution and stuff, because you can kind of sell what you're doing, like what you have there, you know? And it's the same thing with like drugs and all of that. It's like, if you want to destroy your body with a bad diet and with drugs or whatever, that's on you, you know? That's your body to destroy. And it's the same thing with your mind, you know? And this is why we get into censorship and dystopias and all that stuff. It's like, you have the right to possess your mind. I mean, you can't not, really. But you get to control it. You get to exclude from it, you know? People shouldn't be getting to claim that stuff is thought crime. And again, like with drugs and stuff, if you want to destroy your mind, you can. So that's just a little preview. I want to talk about each of those in more depth in a different podcast, but I just wanted to talk about that. Do you have any thoughts on that, Edgar? Have you ever heard this theory that all rights are property rights?
I've heard about it. I mean, it's not something I think about on the daily. The only thing that I've ever really kind of argued is when people talk about selling their bodies. Just like everybody does it. You just clock in, clock out for a company.
Yeah,
somebody
selling
else
your
just
labor.
Yeah, somebody else just has sex, and the other people just have you're working. So either way, your body is technically owned by somebody else for a certain amount of time.
Or at minimum, I would more say that because of the right to convey and the fact that you own your body, that's where freedom of contract comes from.
Yep.
Because you get to, although our Supreme Court has basically said that freedom of contract doesn't exist, which is just bonkers to me. But in my opinion, that's what employment contracts are. I mean, you're not just like selling yourself into slavery. Like, there's an exchange happening, but it's more so that you are selling your labor, which really is a function of like how you move your body. Even if you're just working a desk job, you're still selling your body's efforts for a certain amount of time during a certain window of time. And a lot of ANCAPs really give me a hard time about intellectual property, but I think that comes out of the right to convey the property of your mind. Anyway, so that's all fun stuff. I don't want to get into all of it. I want people to keep tuning into the podcast to learn more about property rights. I'm really passionate about it, though, and I think that if you are a libertarian and you're like, if your knowledge of property rights is kind of I would recommend reading up on it, because in my opinion, and this is something I told my husband when I told him I wanted to write my property manifesto, if the goal of communism is to abolish all private property, then the opposite of that is to focus on private property, right? Like if communism is anti-private property and communism is kind of like the root of all evil, in my opinion, socialism, all that mess, then for me, the right answer almost has to be coming from property rights. And I had this revelation in the shower one day. I was like, oh my God, all of these rights are property rights if you just look at them through a propertarian lens, or if you look at them through a property rights lens with a bundle of sticks. And I stand by that. If libertarians can come to understand what the hell I'm talking about when I talk about these things, because especially like when I talk about abortion and some of these other things, like also the rights of children and things like that, like we're going to get into some more complicated stuff. But I really think that this can unify libertarians, because right now, man, libertarians are all over the place. We've got like, people care about the non-aggression principle, but then people have all these different definitions about, like there's some people who say freedom of movement is a right, but then there's other people who say no, like a nation has to have the right to exclude, immigrants from it. And then, we're all over the place. But I think that this is one unifying theory. It's not like capitalism plus the non-aggression principle plus free speech plus tolerance plus whatever. It's like, no, if you just apply property rights to everything, then you can get a solution that actually ends up being very libertarian, in my opinion.
Does
hey,
maybe allodial title?
huh? What's that?
That means like absolutely nothing to me.
What does it say again?
Allodial title, ALLODIAL title.
All dial tile? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with. I don't know if I'm just misunderstanding or
Correct.
Because I can't read it. I don't know.
Yeah, and my ESL Mexican self is probably butchering the shit out of it.
Are you really ESL?
I'm ESL, yeah.
Interesting.
English is my second language. My parents came here illegally and then got amnesty because of Ronald Reagan. So I secured the residency here, though.
Ronald Reagan, really?
So I'm definitely an anchor baby. And then Colin says, yes, if we all had our birthright to sovereign homestead land and water, building communities from that right foundation, the centuries of political mayhem, injustice, tyranny could finally come to an end.
Well, thank you, man. That's what I hope.
Yeah.
Because I really, I've never really had the drive to write a book before because I was like, what am I going to write about? But this in particular, I think it's really important because Ron Paul, right, like he did a great job of awakening like the libertarian spirit in America. And he wrote his manifesto, or, the revolution. And it's great, like Ron Paul is so articulate and he has such good opinions on so many things. And he's really shaped my opinions. And it's the same with Rothbard too. Like I read For a New Liberty when I was in law school. I was in constitutional law, like hating my life because they were teaching it in a way that just, as a constitutionalist, I was just so, or as an originalist, I would say, I was just so disgusted by how my class was taught. But I just lost my train of thought too.
Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Oh. Yeah. Allodial title. I'll have to look this up. Edgar wrote it down so I could see how it's spelled. Oh, that's what I was saying. I think that there's problems with both Ron Paul's and Murray Rothbard's interpretations. And it's not that they aren't brilliant, but they're just not quite there yet, in my opinion. And I know it's like so arrogant of me to be like, oh, I figured out shit that Ron Paul and Murray Rothbard didn't even figure out. But I'm just trying to figure out a way for libertarianism to, first of all, come together and be more united under one principal idea. Because, to be honest, that's sort of like the left has been winning a lot of battles, and that's what they do. They've got one unifying idea. I mean, it might be freaking crazy, it might be insane, but they're anti-bigot, they're anti-whatever, and they just focus on that. And I just think that, you know, as libertarians, we're too all over the place. We've got to hone this in. And so that's why I call myself a propertarian as well. Because there's so many different branches of libertarianism these days. Bill Maher calls himself a libertarian, and so does Larry Elder. And so do I. And I don't agree with them on like at least half of what each of them think. So libertarianism, in my opinion, the word has lost most of its meaning. And so I'm trying to figure out a way where I can say, listen, I'm a propertarian. This is what a propertarian thinks. It's grounded in libertarian ideas, but it's not just this amorphous thing of like, I'm just for small government and non-aggression and yada yada. Or, I don't know, Bill Maher's version of libertarianism, which is like, I'm just for free speech. Or Larry Elder's version, which is essentially, I'm just for capitalism. Just bear with me, you know? And I think that if you guys really listen and pay attention, I might be able to sway you. I might be able to. And with that, I'm going to go to my last part of the podcast. Like I said, I put this at the end in case people want to peace out before I get all spiritual on y'all. But I have a particular quote from the gospel that I want to read today. And it's not just because I'm trying to preach to you like, oh, Jesus is the light and the way, even though I do think that. But it's more so that I think it's relevant to our current times. So if you'll just bear with me here. I'm going to read an excerpt from John 18. Pilate entered the praetorium again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingship is not of this world. If my kingship were of this world, my servants would fight, that I might not be handed over to the Jews, but my kingship is not of this world." Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am king. For this I was born, and for this I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And this is one of my favorite Bible verses, especially when I talk about the government. I think it's just such a perfect example of what's wrong with the government, because just that last statement, you know, Jesus says, my whole purpose is to testify to the truth. And Pontius Pilate's response is, what's truth? Like, what does that even mean? And to me, that just sounds exactly like the postmodernists of our day, right? It's like, what is truth? We all have our own truth. We all experience our own, you know, life. We all have our different, you know, it's like, don't challenge my experience. Don't question my experience. No one grand narrative is right. No one truth is better than any other truth. And I think it's something that our government has done for a really long time too, which is that they're not honest with people. They're perfectly happy to lie. Our government and our media kind of have created this situation where, I mean, the question, what is truth, is perfectly relevant, you know? Scott Adams talks about how, and this goes back to the Cultural Civil War too, that in effect our country now is comprised of two groups of people who are watching different movies. You know, like we're looking at the same events and we're seeing a completely different movie. And in that, and it feeds into this whole cultural war thing. It's like, we can't even agree on what's true anymore, man. We can't even agree on biology, right? Like I just said something online previously about, like, you know, men can't get periods. And I got a lot of pushback on that. Like a disturbing amount of pushback on that. And I just really hope that my audience, I mean, even if... Oh, go ahead, Edgar. I want to hear what you're going to say.
What fucking man wants to have a period?
I know. Why would they even want to claim that?
Like why?
It's true though, man. Like, really, it sucks. You don't want to have
like it's silly shit like that. Like, it's just stuff I don't want to, like, Why?
Like, why
Like,
would you even
why?
want that?
Like why?
Who was it in that? It was one of the Democrat debates. Someone said that they have to guarantee abortion rights for men too. Like that was one there.
Yeah, this is crazy. Oh, so me going up to you like, hey, just kill the baby?
No, like the idea is that men can get pregnant too, and so we have to fight for a man's right to an abortion.
Damn.
Or some nonsense. It's all insane. That's
Yeah.
why I called the podcast Down the Rabbit Hole, man.
Yeah,
I mean,
y'all can keep the periods. I'll be over here. And my Tampax free.
can I give it to the men? I'll give it away, man. I don't want it.
Is that the cooties they spoke about in school?
Those are the real cooties. But no, it's true. I mean, I just think that we don't even have a narrative about the same narrative about what's true anymore. And I really think that if our country is ever going to get past this cultural civil war, the thing that's going to save us is coming back to the truth and coming back to observable reality. I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but we do what we can. I'm here trying to speak the truth, and that's why I read this quote too. It's like, if Christ's purpose is to speak the truth, then that's what I'm going to do too. I'm going to do my best to speak the truth, because it's like Jordan Peterson says, speaking the truth is powerful. Like, speaking truth brings good into being, right? And if postmodernism, I view postmodernism as the greatest evil of our time, because it's trying to destroy that which actually creates good, which is the pursuit of truth. So, and that's why I'm here doing this podcast. Are there any other questions, though, before I sign off?
Nope. Just one final statement from Brett. Once again, he too hard passes on that period.
Thanks, Brett. I appreciate you tuning in. And I appreciate everyone for tuning in to my first episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm going to be doing this every Monday. I'll probably do, several episodes just by myself, but I will be trying to eventually start getting guests on the podcast as well. But I really appreciate everyone tuning in. I was really surprised at how many people jumped in the live chat tonight, so thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much to Edgar and Guns for Everyone for making this podcast possible. I will always plug Guns for Everyone because of all the stuff that Edgar has done for me. So if you're in Colorado and you want to take a concealed carry class, Guns for Everyone offers free concealed carry classes so you can get your permit. And I really think that, especially in the crazy world that we live in, if we're going to be in Wonderland, you should be armed. So make sure to check out Guns for Everyone if you're in Colorado. I had been doing the podcast with Antonia, but now since I'm doing my own podcast, I'm going to reset up some of the donation mechanisms. I'm going to change my Patreon. I'm going to change the Bitcoin account. I'm going to change the physical address, all of that. I'll update it and put it in the description in case you want to support this podcast. I'm not doing it for money, but I would always appreciate any financial support that you'd like to offer. And yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you guys have a great week, and live free, guys. Bye.